In this lesson, we'll start to alter the color of our environment in order to get some better reflections on the pools of water. Alright, so here's what we have so far, and as I mentioned at the end of the previous lesson, we now have a little bit of an issue now that we've introduced these pools of water into our scene. And that is that these pools of water are now reflecting this gray environment. Now, thinking a little bit further ahead, I probably would like these pools of water to reflect something a little bit more like a sky color, so something a little bit more like a blue. Now the problem is that if I were to simply come in and begin altering the environment color to something like blue, it would severely alter the coloration that we have here, because a lot of what we see here is coming from the final gather rays that are looking at this gray color. So I'll illustrate this really quickly. If I save my scene for comparison, and then if I were to simply go in and change my environment color to something a little bit more blue, so this will be something that is kind of a nice pale sky color. And then if I were to re-render this, you could really kind of see what I was talking about. You can see that now everything has taken on this very blue tint if you compare what we had before to what we have now. Although you can see at this point now that the pools are reflecting the sky color a little bit closer to what we would want. Okay, so how can we actually get the best of both worlds, where we can start to retain this original lighting information that we had before, but still start to get these blue pools of water, or these pools of water to reflect this blue environment? Well, what we can do is introduce a second piece of geometry that is strictly responsible for casting the final gather rays, but leave it invisible so that everything still reflects these blue sky environment. So let's go ahead and set this up. We can create either a polygon or a NURBS sphere. Really doesn't matter which one we choose. And what we'll do is scale this sphere up to the size where it will pretty much encompass the entire scene. There we go, something like that. And now what we'll do is assign something like a surface shader to this. So let's just simply right click or go to the hypershade and create a new surface shader. There we go. Now we'll set this to about a 50% gray, pretty close to where we had the environment just a moment ago. Now, if we were to simply re-render this, we would start to get the environment, or rather the sphere, which would be blocking all of the blue light from the environment. So we would pretty much have exactly what we had before we introduced this blue environment. So let's take this sphere, and we'll go to the render stats, and we'll change a few things in order to make this sphere completely invisible to the render. But because it is the closest object as far as the final gather rays are concerned, the final gather rays will still sample this gray environment color, this gray sphere color. So let's first tell this not to cast or receive any shadows. That way we can make sure that this sphere is not going to be blocking any light, especially from our directional light source. Let's also disable the primary visibility on this sphere, so that way it's not visible as far as the render is concerned. And then we also want to make sure that this sphere is not visible in the reflections or refractions. So that way we can make sure that any of these reflective objects will not reflect that environment, or this sphere that we have set up. So now, with these few changes made, let's see what we have. Again, we'll save this for comparison, and now re-render. And now, if we re-render, we can have something that is very, very close to what we had before, but with the addition of now this blue environment. So this is what we had before with just the blue environment with no sphere. And now by introducing this sphere, we've kind of gotten back to the original lighting solution that we had before. So what's happening is these final gather rays that we're sending out into the scene are reaching out, and even though this sphere is invisible to the renderer, it's not invisible to the final gather rays. So the rays can still reach out and hit this surface before they reach out to the environment. So the final gather rays are still returning the gray color from this sphere to the final rendered result. However, because this sphere is invisible to the renderer, we can now tell the sphere to be excluded from things like reflections and the primary visibility to the camera as well. So we start to get really this perfect mixture of both worlds. So something like this can be a really nice trick to use. Even if you have multiple spheres, we could have one sphere on the inside that is responsible for the final gather solution, and then another sphere on the outside that would be responsible for the reflections. So kind of a neat little trick to be able to use if you want the final gather result to come from one piece of geometry, but the reflected result to come from something completely different. We do have that freedom with a few of these little tricks. Alright, so now that we have this environment set up and the lighting solution a little bit closer to what we want, now let's start to focus on some of the quality settings. Now that we kind of have most of the light set up, we can now start to introduce some real quality elements as far as like the displacement maps, and start to increase the quality of our lighting and things like that. So now we'll begin for the next few lessons starting to introduce some of these things that will start to bump up our render time, and that's why we have not done them up until this point. So we'll start to work on those now in our next lesson.